Assalamu alaikum, I'm Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, and I'm Amanda. And this is Converts Unplugged. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversation.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam from the Shahada and beyond.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of Converts Unplugged. This month, we're continuing on our topic of marriage, and we welcome Ustadha Amina Blake to the podcast. We're going to be discussing with her marriage do's and don'ts.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Amina. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. We are really pleased that you could make it onto our podcast. I'm sure you have many gems for our listeners with regard to marriage. Sister Amina, would you mind introducing yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yep, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's really an honour to be invited onto this amazing show. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, my name is Ustadha Amina Blake. I'm a convert Muslim of 29 years this year.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah, yeah. At the moment, what I'm doing with life, I'm an Islamic scholar in a university called Markfield Institute of Higher Education. I also run a women's project providing support and housing for victims of domestic abuse. For women and children, and I also travel around doing lectures when it's not lockdown, and I also do online regular lectures as well with different organisations. So,
could you tell us a little bit about your story of how you came to Islam for the listeners? I know it's not our main topic today, but I think we'd be remiss in not including this a little bit.
Well, actually, I really do believe that when somebody becomes Muslim, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives somebody hidayah, it really comes from way before they actually maybe even hear the word Islam or see a Muslim or meet a Muslim. So really my journey, of course, like all of us, begins way before that. And actually as a child, I was I had this feeling of strangeness. And yeah, I'm quite strange, to be honest, but but this is a different feeling of strangeness. In Arabic, it's called gharib. And what that means is when you feel like a stranger in the world. So I always felt right up to sort of in my mid-teens, I didn't really properly fit in, even though I tried so hard. I tried the nightclubbing and I tried the sort of alcohol and, the odd spliff and stuff. But actually, it never sat comfortable with me. I never, but then actually I had a few Muslim friends who weren't practicing, and actually at the time I was made homeless because I was actually assaulted by some people when I was sort of 17 or early 18, and that led me to go to a sister's house. She invited me to go and stay with her for until I found somewhere more permanent. And I've always been a bit of a bookworm. And she had one book in the house, and that was the Quran. And I'm actually quite nosy as well. And subhanAllah, also very interesting to know, I don't know whether you guys found this before you became Muslim, but I got really sick as well a few weeks before taking my Shahada. I had a really terrible skin infection, which gave me a fever. I was almost delirious, subhanAllah. And it's almost like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was kind of cleansing me to be ready for accepting Islam. I asked this sister, I said, can I have a look at this book that you've got, this Quran? I said, what is it? She said, well, this is the Quran, and as Muslims, this is our book, and it's the book of truth. And I said, okay, well, can I have a look? Okay. So she said, go and wash your hands and stuff. And she let me have a look at this Quran. And I was astounded that the wording in the Quran, it was the Yusuf Ali version of the Quran, the big, thick one with the archaic language in it, the archaic English and the old-fashioned English. And when I read this, it reminded me of the Bible. And I said, well, that's fine, but if you're telling me that it's a book of truth, it sounds to me like the Bible. So how can you say that this is the book of truth? She said, I don't know the details. My next door neighbour will be able to kind of let you know. Her next door neighbour happens to be a Reva brother called Dawood. What is it with revert brothers, mashallah, called Dawood? I know loads of revert brothers called Dawood. It's true, right?
Mashallah. Yeah, there are a few I can think of. Yeah.
Maybe they were called David before, and then they sort of Dawooded themselves or something. SubhanAllah. So anyway, really nice brother. But back in those days, we were talking the early 90s here. So back in those days, revert Muslims, it just wasn't a thing, really. I mean, there were revert Muslims around, but I just thought it was super weird. Why would this guy grow this little beardy thing and sort of, he was a Sufi brother, mashallah. So he had his house very sort of Turkish style. He was a follower of Sheikh Nazim. Okay. So he had it very, very Turkish style and joss sticks everywhere and this and that. So it was a little bit alien to me. Because as an English person, I didn't really get that. So anyway, I asked him, I said, well, why is it that the Quran is God's word? Well, how is this true? I said, if I'm going to follow something, I need it to be proven to me. Otherwise, why bother? I'm not going to waste my time with this. So he said, look, give me a few days. I'll come back to you. So I was like, okay, no problem. So anyway, he came back a few days later and he basically said, look, these are some verses out of the Quran. This Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. And he spoke about the verses with the mountains being in stakes in the earth, the embryonic development, the way that, sort of all this scientific stuff. Really, he knew what to say to me and what verses to bring from the Quran, and also some of the linguistic miracles as well of the Quran. And then he said, oh, by the way, this was revealed 1400 years ago to a guy in the middle of a desert city who couldn't read or write. And I was like, whoa, you're having a laugh. So how has this come from that? So, but actually, in order to become Muslim, you guys know, in order to become Muslim, you have to have two ingredients, right? You have to have the ilm, the knowledge, and the qalb, the heart. And until those two things come together, you're not going to become Muslim. You have to have both, a little bit of knowledge and the iman that's going to make you actually embrace. I've got the knowledge, so I kind of believed it. I believed what he was saying, but I hadn't had that iman shot. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala usually gives people who convert to Islam, he gives like this, and the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam referred to this as halawat al-iman. Halawat al-iman is the sweetness of iman, sweetness of faith. And it's like it's a very nice word in Arabic, because halawa, even when you go out for sweets in an Arab country, you say halawa, because it's a taste. And iman is like a taste. When you feel that iman, it's almost like a taste running through your whole body. SubhanAllah, just an amazing experience. But I needed that in order to become Muslim. So he also gave us a video. You guys, mashallah, are far too young to remember video, so I'm not going to go with that. It's a boxing. Yes, you are. I'm having a laugh. Anyway, so actually, this video was a film that most reverts see it sometime in their lives, which is the Risala, the message. The message, which obviously is very old film, 3.5 odd hours long, and I was a teenager, so. I was kind of in and out of the room. We watched this film in my friend's house, and I was in and out of the room. It's a little bit, this is very long. So at the end of the film, of course, I'm sure you guys have both seen this. At the end of the film, they play the adhan, and it's actually meant to be Bilal radiallahu anhu who recites the adhan at the end of the film, which is after the death of the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just happened to bring me into the doorway of that room when the adhan was being recited. And actually what they had on the screen was a translation of this. And I remember it was the bit of the adhan that says, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah. And it said, come to prayer. And I just looked at this and I heard this amazing sound. And it was like, this is when I got the iman shot, the halawat al-iman. And it was like I was being immersed in a warm, fizzy bath. And I got this, every single hair on my body just stood on end. And it was the most beautiful feeling ever. And I remember saying to my friend, I said, if this is just the call to prayer, then I need to become Muslim now. If this is the effect just of the call to prayer, then I need to become Muslim. I want to do that now. SubhanAllah. But 3 days later, I actually took my Shahada at the mosque where the brother was based, which was, unfortunately, that burnt down maybe like 20 years after that. It was a converted church which they made into a Sufi centre in Sheffield. And I took my Shahada, and that really was the beginning of this amazing journey. And really from there to get to the point that I've got to now, I didn't really plan any of it. All of it is being totally choreographed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what's so amazing, really.
I mean, it's an amazing story. And that film, I think I watched that film maybe a few years after I became Muslim was when I first saw it. And it does, I mean, even when I watch it, even if I were to sit down and watch it now, I know exactly what you mean about that feeling with the adhan in it. You know, you do feel like you get goosebumps listening to it, mashallah, because you've just seen the whole story, the revelation, the struggle that the first generations went through when the Prophet ﷺ came with the message, and the persecution that they faced, subhanallah. And then to see them being victorious at the end of the film is just, it's so moving. And it is, to me, it's a very empowering movie as well, I think, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah, subhanallah.
I haven't seen it.
You?
Oh my God, I have. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
By the way, for the listeners, Amanda's giving me a look.
I am giving you a look. No. I'm going to go and find it on YouTube and send it to you, and you're going to sit down and watch it.
I have not watched it.
Actually, I'll tell you a secret. I haven't watched it since.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my days.
I'll join you during the day.
Okay, inshallah.
I think it needs to be binge watched. It's really amazing. Yeah.
I'll put it on my list, and very soon, inshallah. Maybe in prep for Ramadan or something. I don't know. Inshallah.
If any of the listeners haven't watched it, I really do recommend it. It's a classic, mashallah.
Well, Jazakallah khair, Sister Amina, for sharing your amazing story and inspiring us all. But now this takes us nicely into the topic for our discussion for today's podcast: marriage, the do's and the don'ts.
Yes, that's right. It's often the case that new Muslims are strongly encouraged, or in some cases coerced, to marry very quickly after taking Shahada. And we thought that since this podcast is for new Muslims and for converts, we would discuss the topic in order to shed some light and perhaps give some guidance on the matter, inshallah.
So as Amanda said, often converts will be given advice that marriage is half of deen, it's sunnah to get married, and things will settle once you get married, etc. Do you think this advice is helpful for new converts to Islam? What would you advise for new Muslims hearing this advice, and how long do you think they should wait before seeking a spouse?
Okay, it's a massive question. It's a massive question. I was one of those people who, when I became Muslim, like literally a few days later, people started approaching me and saying, oh, I'd like you to marry such and such. I want to marry such and such. And the thing is, when you become Muslim, and I have no idea why this happens, and it happens to a lot, especially to sisters. I don't know. Well, it's like you leave your common sense at the door. Mm-hmm. And you've entered this new world, but you suddenly become very sort of open, naive, raw. You're kind of susceptible to these suggestions that if somebody had said that to you before you became Muslim, oh, you're going to meet a guy's mum at your parents' house and then they'll say to you, you can you marry my son next week? We'll have a little ceremony. You would have been like, are you insane? But that would be your response, wouldn't it? So what is it that makes our brains into jelly as soon as we take the Shahada? And I think one of the things I think is because when we come into Islam, we discover a whole new world, don't we? We discover something that actually, unless you've been somebody who has been mixing with Muslims for many years, which most reverts, to be fair, really haven't, or not on a deep personal level anyway. And then you almost want to, and actually in the fields of psychology or sociology, it's called code switching. So you will try and change yourself to almost fit in with your new environment, with your new companions, your new friends, and you automatically trust them. You automatically think, this person has my best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, just because somebody is Muslim, number one, they might not necessarily, well, definitely will not know you well enough to know whether you're ready to get married or not. Mm-hmm. And number two, they might not, although many do, they might not have your best interests at heart. You know, and it's not about going in not trusting people. I think the third point that's really important to make is that when we become Muslim, when you're talking about two halves of the deen, which is, of course, the hadith, which is thrown at new Muslims almost as soon as they've taken the shahada, marriage is half the deen. Actually, for a start, when you talk about marriage being half the deen, that does not make marriage farad. It also doesn't make it obligatory to rush into marriage. And in fact, if you're talking about two halves of the deen, surely you need to start working on your own half of the deen before you start bringing somebody else into the picture. Because otherwise, you're going to be raw and you are going to be new and you're going to be developing. I mean, I know myself as a Muslim, as a new Muslim, I went through more changes in the first 18 months to 2 years of my journey through Islam than probably I have in the rest of my life of the, sort of 27 years as a Muslim. You change massively. You're like a sponge. You're soaking things in. You're learning how to pray. And actually, unless you are already, and I know the reality is that some sisters and some brothers will come into Islam having already got an established boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean, let's say it for what it is. And actually, in those circumstances, then you've got two choices. Either you cut off that relationship because you really don't want to be committing haram when you've just come into, you've just purified yourself. You're a brand new Muslim. You are, you're like a clean slate. All your previous sins are forgiven. And if you keep on the same trajectory as you did before you were Muslim, then it might not lead to a good finish. Why? Because before Islam, we are not accountable, because as non-Muslims, really, actually, the honest truth is that unless you are like a super practicing Jewish person or Christian or something like that, then having a boyfriend or girlfriend is pretty normal, to be fair. It's not really something that in these days people or even society as a whole considered as shameful. But then once you come into the fold of Islam, we know even the most unpracticing Muslim or the newest Muslim ever will know that there is some accountability there. That actually it's very easy to turn something that is un-Islamic into something that is Islamic. So I would say for those people, think very hard about what you want to do, because the reality is if you've got feelings for somebody and you've been with someone for a while and you've obviously already been, sleeping with that person at the end of the day, actually it's going to be very hard just to stop that. Just because you've taken your shahada, you do not suddenly become a chaste angel. It doesn't happen. That's not life. We're human beings. We have habits, we have the whisperings of the shayateen. In fact, when you are a new Muslim, don't think that you're suddenly going to become immune to the whisperings of shaitan, because actually you're even more susceptible. Why? Because the shaitan wants you to trip up at this stage. He wants you to make mistakes and go down roads that you maybe wouldn't have gone down previously, or it wasn't a problem before. However, when it comes to people, like single people, who come into Islam, whether brothers or sisters, and I find that the pressure is more on sisters. And one of the massive problems that I didn't face when I became Muslim is the internet. The Facebook fiends, I call them, these lecherous guys who are all over Facebook looking for new reverts and looking for what they call marriage, who are usually not British citizens, or, you know, maybe some of your listeners are not from Britain themselves, maybe they're from the US or New Zealand or whatever. But you will definitely get, when you convert, and if you're public online, sisters especially, you will definitely get messages in your inbox from guys who will do all the flattery in the world, and they will tell you how amazing you are and tell you how much they love you, even though they don't know you. And they'll give you all this Islamic spiel. And actually, the honest truth is the majority of it is because they want a visa. They're using you.
Yeah.
They will use you. Or they will try and use you to have online intimacy with them or whatever. They might send you rude pictures. I think all the sisters know what, you know, we've all experienced this, you know, porn coming through and all sorts of disgusting stuff. Let's talk about it for what it is, because I think when we become Muslim, we expect everybody who has a Muslim name to be like the Prophet, peace be upon him, and to be like the Sahaba, and to be absolutely wonderful. But actually, we need to safeguard ourselves, brothers and sisters, from being used and abused. Because once you enter into a marriage, and I've heard the most terrifying stories of sisters who have known a guy online and he seems to be legit. And she's like, I've even been speaking to a sister recently, and oh, this guy's legit and he's fantastic and he's this and that. And his parents have spoken to me and all the rest of it. Actually, in the end, and I do give warnings, and I say to sisters, don't do it. Number one, you're not ready. You will change your criteria as you grow as a Muslim. And number two, this guy is definitely using you. Whether you think he loves you or not, put your heart to one side and think with that brain before it becomes even more jellified with emotions. And then what can happen is these sisters will maybe part with a lot of money, or, you know, they'll be almost coerced into giving money for the, you know, the guy who's claiming poverty and he needs a ticket to come to the UK or wherever, you know, he needs some help, or he's a student. And the same goes for, you know, people who are also in your home country who maybe they are on a student visa and their visa's just about to run out. And then they conveniently get in touch with you for marriage. Sisters, and brothers, keep your heads screwed right the way on. Pushing that to one side, there is also the issue of culture. And I've got to talk about the issue of culture.
Yes, please
because,
do.
Yeah, absolutely important. Because whether we like it or not, just because you have taken your Shahada and you have become a Muslim, and even when you're Muslim for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you ain't going to become a Pakistani, you ain't going to become an Arab, you are not going to become a Malaysian or an Indonesian or a Somali or whatever, unless you're from that background in the first place. Okay, so what you have to understand is when you get married, and this is the majority of cases, and the majority of sisters that I know, especially for brothers, for some reason, it seems to work better. I don't know if you've noticed, guys, but that for the brothers, it seems to work out better than for the sisters. I have no idea, subhanAllah. But the expectations of somebody who is a first generation, whether they're, you know, somebody from abroad or somebody here who's first generation, who's maybe not been in your country for that long. And here I'm going to talk from a British perspective rather than from any other perspective. The culture will be totally different. His expectations of what he wants you to do as a wife will be totally different from what your expectations are of a Muslim husband. And here I'm talking from an Islamic viewpoint, because just because we read these amazing books about the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what a brilliant husband he was, and obviously remember he is the benchmark. And actually, brothers should and sisters should be trying to reach the benchmark of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the way they are. But we find, especially with people who are less practicing particular madhab, then they will have a lot of cultural influence on what they expect. So, sisters, if you marry somebody from a certain background, you need to have a good think about, are you going to be expected, or will you be able to step into the shoes, essentially, of what his mother is like or what his sister is like? So will you be prepared to give up your work, give up your freedom, maybe not really have the friends that you want to have? Maybe you will be expected to cook the food and eat the food all the time that he's been brought up on. So it's no more sausage and mash and gravy, because he won't tolerate it, he won't want it. He's going to want the food that he's been brought up with. And then there's the language barrier. We've got to talk about that. Mm. The language barrier is a massive problem, because if you have somebody who speaks very little English, or his English is, or her English is quite broken, then unless you learn one another's languages properly, then you will struggle to communicate. And it's very easy to miscommunicate, and that will lead to misunderstanding and will lead to arguments. The reason why I'm saying this is, and it's sounding now like I'm having this total shot out at people who are not from a British background. Okay, I'm absolutely not doing that. But I've seen so many sisters in particular, marriages fail in tears, and maybe they've suffered other problems as a result of this total lack of compatibility between the couple. And then by the time you're 5 years, 10 years down the line, you might have got 2 or 3 or 4 kids. And then, of course, they're going to suffer as well. So you have to really think, when you get married, my brothers and sisters, this is the person who is going to be the mother or the father of your kids. Mm-hmm. This is the culture and the way that your children will be brought up in. So if this man, for example, is expecting you as a sister to ask for his permission every time you leave the house, then he'll have the same expectation of his daughters, your children. If this man is expecting you to be completely obedient to him, and these guys do, I'm sorry, but many of them do, because that's the cultural, and this is not an Islamic thing, this is a cultural thing, even though they will try to wrap it up in lovely Islamic wrapping paper, it's not. That's I kind of teach this stuff at university, so I know that it's not. However, if you're not prepared to do that, and you can't envisage yourself spending the rest of your life doing that, then don't do it. But on the other hand, if you find somebody who is, has been raised in Britain, maybe they came here a very young child, they understand the culture, they've been through the schooling system, it doesn't matter what their background is. It could be Pakistani or Arab or Somali or whatever, but they understand what it is to have your culture, or another revert, of course, which is, I don't know why, but reverts kind of tend to steer clear of marrying other reverts very often, apart from in the West Indian community. And mashallah, they do tend to marry each other.
To be honest, when I was looking to get married, I was actually told, do not marry another convert. And when I said, why not? The reason was because you can't trust that they won't go back to their old ways.
I've heard that too.
And that just disgusted me, actually, because I thought to myself, well, then you're saying basically that I might go back to my old ways.
Absolutely.
So
and that seems to be like a cultural thing. I think it is changing a little bit now, isn't it? Now we're on sort of 3rd, 4th generation, but I know I definitely heard this where there might be a convert brother who wants to get married, and the first thing the family will say, well, what happens if he goes back to Jahiliyyah again? I just feel like turning around and saying, well, what if your daughter goes to Jahiliyyah?
Exactly. This is the thing. None of us are guaranteed from one day to the next, Absolutely. But I'm glad that you brought up the cultural issues, because I personally know some couples where, the sister is UK born and bred and her husband is from abroad, but they went into it knowing ahead of time that there would be cultural differences and challenges, therefore, and they were willing to put in the work. But I think what happens quite a bit, and I'm saying this for both brothers and sisters, is when we convert, we don't know the difference, what's culture and what's Islam. And we can fall into the trap of thinking that our culture, because it's not the culture of a country that is majority Muslim, we think of it as un-Islamic.
Absolutely.
And we think of South Asian culture, Arab culture, Southeast Asian culture, and so on as being Islamic culture because most people are Muslim. But what makes it that?
Yeah.
Other than it being in that country for a few hundred more years than it's been in the UK and more people adhering to that religion. There is nothing inherently Islamic about South Asian culture or Arab culture, or other than when people actually are Muslim and praying 5 times a day and doing, following Islam. British culture can be just as Islamic. And what I find a lot of, and maybe especially sisters, because perhaps we are more adaptable, I find a tendency to, even before marriage, to sort of try to adopt the culture of whatever community you happen to be interacting with more. So like, the stories of sisters who they start wearing hijab and then they want to go and buy shalwar kameez or abayas.
I so did that.
I did too.
I tried to be a Pakistani. That was a big fail. And then I tried to be a Yemeni, and I was kind of, because I was mashallah, my children are mixed Yemeni English and stuff, and I lived in Yemen for a while as well.
Yes, mashallah.
And I really loved the Yemeni culture, but it wasn't until I'd probably been Muslim for about 12 years. I'd been to Yemen, lived in Yemen, come back to the UK again, and went to university. And it wasn't until then I realised that actually what I needed to do all along, and the reason why I've been struggling so badly with cultural issues, is I just needed to be English, because that's what I am.
Exactly.
Can I add to that? I think I totally relate with that point, because that's exactly how I feel now. I mean, I didn't do the whole, look, let's put hijab on and go and get shalwar kameez. No, I didn't do any of that stuff. Thank you. But I did feel within the community I was in before I moved was that to be a proper quote unquote Muslim, you must wear an abaya. And I know there's, interpretation of what that is. And there were other aspects as well. And because I was around sisters who weren't of my background, and I'm not saying they had to be, because I've got friends from all cultures, it just felt sometimes I would have comments about our culture, British culture. Obviously I'm Welsh. I'm actually Welsh. I'm not actually English, but there were comments about certain things, and over the years it just became too much, and I felt like I needed to be more myself. And I feel like now I've come away from that community, that particular community, that I can be more myself, because the eyes aren't literally on me now. Because they don't interact. I can't see them. I mean, obviously pre-lockdown, you know what I mean? Does that make any sense? So I feel I can be more myself. And exactly what you just said, I feel I need to be more what Aisha was, and she's Welsh. I actually identify strongly with being Welsh, despite my very English accent. So yeah, I completely relate. And I think a lot of people, they don't realize that actually you can, if you're not careful, lose who you actually really are.
100%. You can lose yourself. Absolutely.
I
lost myself for 12 years. I lost myself.
Yeah. No, I think I did also lose myself for a number of years. And I think that, I know, the culture of my children's, that side of the family, their father's side of the family. I know it. I get it. I understand it. I am not it. And it took me a long time to sort of come to terms with the fact that is not me. I have full respect for that culture, but it is not me. And I get along with people from that culture because I get them.
Yeah.
But I know too that we are different. We are very different, but it comes, you need to have that level of understanding of who you are so that you can appreciate the difference in others, I think. And if you're at that stage of still trying to figure out who you are and you marry somebody, even if that person is from the UK, is UK born and raised, is your own culture and so on, you're still figuring out who you are. And then you want to bring another entire human being into your life. It's very, it's sort of a recipe for issues. I don't want to say disaster, but it's a recipe for having issues, I think. But let's assume that, okay, we've convinced all of the brothers and sisters out there to sort of put the brakes on getting married until at least they've, come to terms with who they are as a Muslim a little bit. And now they've decided that, they know their religion well enough and they do want to get married. They do want to find their life partner, find the person who's going to, be the mother or the father of their children. How would you advise such a person to start looking? I mean, we don't have family to help us out. Dad doesn't know all of the uncles at the mosque who have eligible sons and so on. So where do we begin? I know that Aisha has written down something here about finding a guardian, a wali or a wakil. Even how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean,
Any
are.
suggestions?
It's very difficult, and I do get lots of brothers and sisters approaching me for advice on this matter. I would definitely say for brothers or sisters, I mean, even when you first become Muslim, it's really important, if you can, to have somebody who will mentor you. And then, of course, that would be the obvious person to help you out when it comes to advice on marriage and kind of who what the red flags are, what the positive things to look out for are, etc. But if you haven't got that, there are new Muslim organisations that you can approach who will be able to provide some advice and support for you. I mean, you can even approach me and I will help you out as much as I can. It's not a problem. I help a lot of people out with this stuff. But when it comes to a guardian, I know traditionally a guardian is a male. And when it comes to wali and the actual nikah, that is a male. However, when it comes to actually having a guardian to basically look out for you, someone who's got your back, then it doesn't matter if it's a sister. It doesn't matter who it is, as long as it's somebody who you trust, number one. So you might not even know the local imam at the local masjid. So why would you approach somebody who you don't even know? I mean, he might be amazing. I'm sure he is, mashallah. But why would you approach somebody who you don't even know to take on probably one of the most important roles that you are delegating to somebody that you will ever do? This is like the beginning of the rest of your life. So first of all, somebody that you trust definitely should be your guardian. Now, where to look, I think, was the next question. Just because you've appointed somebody as your guardian, and I think sometimes, and we are coming out of this, but I think Muslim communities sometimes have a bit of a conservative, and I personally think quite old-fashioned view of how to look for a spouse. The fact is, like you were rightly saying, that especially for reverts, we don't know the uncles in the masjid, and what lads are available, men are available, etc., etc. And and also there's the fact that you have to filter out the undesirable suitors, because there will be plenty of them, especially for sisters. There will be plenty of suitors who you do not want to be touching with a barge pole. Yeah. But then sometimes, as new Muslims, it's very difficult to fathom out who those are, because they have the big beard and they have the right clothes and they say mashallah a lot and they say alhamdulillah a lot and they smile a lot. And then you're just like, yeah, woo, look at him. He's like the prophet, peace be upon him. He must be amazing. But actually, kind of not the case. Just because somebody looks the part doesn't mean that they are the part. And then, whoever you choose as your guardian can guide you through that process, even if it's signposting you. I mean, I know a lot of new Muslims now might live in areas where there actually aren't any Muslims.
That's true.
So then you might not have a masjid to go to, especially, there are maybe new Muslims listening today who are in New Zealand. I have quite a big following in New Zealand and in Australia and the USA and places like Canada and places like that, where they might live in a small town and there isn't even a masjid, let alone other Muslims. So then how? Now, nowadays, if you're careful and selective, there are online platforms that you can search for a spouse on. And I would say approach, but with care. Because again, you get a lot of undesirables on these times. Some of them on like nowadays, you can actually filter out the types of people who you don't want to contact you or you don't want to contact. So that is quite a useful tool for sort of getting yourself out there and looking for the right type of person. And that, again, that's something that you can do with the person who you've chosen as your guardian. And you can look for the right credentials. You can look for the right type of profile, somebody who fits the, the type of person that you really want to end up marrying. And be selective, because it's not a case, and I think there is, especially for new Muslims who've been divorced already, especially for sisters, there is a tendency to just take the first thing that comes along. It's like, oh, somebody wants me, that's fine, okay, let's do this. And then you just end up in this disastrous place because you've rushed into it, you've made a bad decision, you've maybe gone against sometimes you go against the advice of other people. And, I personally know quite a few people who've done that, and it's ended up a disaster, subhanAllah.
So I wanted to ask about red flags, because you did briefly mention red flags, and I did actually want to touch upon that. If you could advise listeners what red flags are, the kind of things to look out for and how to kind of avoid them, and when we should actually stop looking into a potential suitor. When would that time be?
Usually the communication between, and this is another thing that you can use your guardian for. When it comes to communicating with the potential, so imagine you've gone through the swiping thing, or, an initial meeting or a phone call, or, however it is you met somebody, you think, okay, let's take it to the next stage. So the initial stages will be very, quite formal. They might involve you reading a profile that somebody sends out on WhatsApp and maybe seeing a photograph, and then maybe you might be put in touch with a family member or something like that, and that's fine. But there will come a point, if you're interested in this person, male or female, that you want to take it a step further and maybe start having some direct communication. And whether we like it or not, this is the way that the majority of people, even if they're super practicing, are going. It's usually WhatsApp, or it's like Facebook Messenger, or some kind of online forum, or once you get a little bit further down the line, phone calls and things like that. Okay. Now, when it comes to communication, we have to be really, really careful. Number one, you should never, ever, ever give your address. You should never give your, even necessarily your area, say where city that you live in, but don't be specific until you've done your checks on that individual, because you don't actually know who you're talking to. I could set up a profile right now on, some website or Facebook or whatever, and I can be whoever I want to be. I can be Mohammed Ahmed from Luton, and I can approach you, and you wouldn't know any different, would you? And I could bring you along, take you for a ride, and then, dump you at the end of it, and I've had my fun. So be very, very careful that you do not give personal information out. Never give PayPal's, bank accounts, addresses. And if the person starts asking for any of that stuff, dump them immediately. I know that's a very Yorkshire thing, but just get rid, because you don't need it. You don't need hassle. Another big thing, I think, when you're going on to communication is, if you can, when it comes to texting, because it's so easy, even for you, mashallah, and I know all your listeners, mashallah, super practicing, but guess what? We're also human. Yeah. And we have feelings and we have emotions, and you start getting kind of, a bit hot under the collar when somebody says certain things to you, and it's somebody, obviously this is somebody you fancy and somebody who you're starting to get emotions for. And then, things can start going down a bit of a not great route when it comes to communication. It starts off with a little flower being sent, and then maybe a couple of love hearts here and there. And then before you know it, you're sexting. And that is something that people do. And this is the way the shayateen work, my brothers and sisters. Please don't think that you're immune, because you are a fool if you think you are. None of us, me, the sisters, nobody is immune from this stuff. So if you start going down that road where you're super attracted to someone and they start sending slightly inappropriate things, or maybe very inappropriate things, cut it off. But if you feel that you are both maybe slipping down a road and it's a very much a mutual thing, get a third person involved in your texting. So make a little WhatsApp group or make a Facebook messenger group with your guardian or with somebody that you trust. They don't have to join in your conversations, but then you're safeguarded, because when the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about this situation, we can also apply it to the internet. So when there are two together, the third is the shaitan, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same with texting. It's the same with talking over the phone. So just safeguard yourselves. Now, you're asking about red flags. Okay, so red flags, which is where you cut and run. Mm-hmm. All right. So like I said, asking for personal details, etc. Asking to meet up, especially for sisters. Don't go and meet guys. Don't do it. Don't go and meet brothers on your own. If a brother is expecting you to go and meet him, even if it's in a public place, on your own, then to me, there is something disrespectful about that. Because believe you and me, brothers and sisters, he ain't going to be expecting that for his sister or his mother or his cousin. So why is he expecting it for you? Okay. So think about that. When brothers are asking you or sisters are asking you to do things that are unreasonable, then there's clearly a problem there. Mm-hmm. Now, I've also heard of other situations where people start to get controlling and coercive online. So yes. They might trying to manipulate you into doing something, maybe taking your hijab off on a video call, or even more, start taking more clothes off on it. Before you know it, sisters, your picture and images will be all over the internet, and he will use it to bribe you with. So be careful. Don't do anything that might lead down a road that will destroy you, because believe me, it will destroy you mentally and in other ways as well. SubhanAllah. So safeguard yourself.
I'd like to add to what you were saying about the manipulation, because I've had personal experience, and I know other sisters have had this experience, when you're communicating with somebody and it seems to be going quite well, but then they seem to, there's been no proposal made, no agreement of marriage or anything. And suddenly the brother or the sister, in one case that I know of, is feeling entitled.
Yes.
To treat you as if you are already married. And when I say as if you are already married, it's indicative of how toxic that marriage will be. How many sisters I know who they've only just started communicating with this person. They say to the person, I'll message you tomorrow night. And then they forget, or they're tired, or they're sick, and they don't. And the brother blows up at them. So, you said you would call. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you? And you're thinking, well, people forget. And we've had maybe 2 days worth of messages between each other. Why do you feel entitled to my time? And that, to me, I remember a sister coming to me and complaining that this brother she had been talking to was acting in this very controlling manner. And I said to her, if he's like that now, what's he going to be like if you marry him?
100%. Absolutely.
And alhamdulillah, she broke that off. So, because I know sisters who have not broken it off, and then
absolutely. I think there is a certain. We also, especially if you're a bit of an empath, you do kind of feel that you are almost, because you've started communicating with somebody, and you've maybe even just been communicating for a small amount of time. That small amount of time can seem like a long time.
Yeah.
And then there's, there tends to be like emotional blackmail, and they will, they'll pretend like they're upset if you try and break it off. And you almost feel like they've got some kind of hold over you. Sisters, brothers, if you feel uncomfortable with the way someone's communicating, then just put off communication. That's what you owe them. Nothing. Don't want to speak to you anymore. Jazakallah khair. Have a nice life. Goodbye. That's it. Done. Finished. Wassalam.
Definitely.
And that's it. Don't be frightened of walking away, because actually that person would be damaging to you anyway. So why would you want to keep communicating with somebody and, you're stringing each other along for what? So that it's just going to end anyway. It's just, it's not worth it. It's better just to be straight. If you're uncomfortable, don't go against the way your heart feels. If your heart feels uncomfortable with something, and so many of us do this, We push through that uncomfortable feeling. Oh, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. It'll settle. It'll be fine. But actually, it's not going to be fine. If your hearts are very strong communicators. If your heart is communicating, especially if you've prayed istikhara, and istikhara should be a part of every single stage of this process. If you've done istikhara and your heart is feeling uncomfortable, then it's time to walk away. It's time to cut that off. No matter what your emotions are saying, if your heart is feeling uncomfortable with something, then don't do it. Because that, might well be the outcome of your istikhara.
Well, that's an important point, because I think still a lot of people misunderstand when you make istikhara, how do you know what the response is? Yeah, it's not a dream. It's not the sense. It's how you feel and how easy it goes. And definitely, if you feel uneasy about something, that's an indication. Absolutely.
And another indication I've had myself personally is what you just said, when things don't go easy, and what that means is literally maybe blocks or obstacles can be put in your way, or all of a sudden you'll have someone tell you something about that person which you didn't expect. Something will come up, and these are the kind of things that I've had personally for me, and they've always usually worked. Doesn't mean to say I've gone with them, unfortunately, but in hindsight now, I realize that that's how my istikharas work. Or sometimes, like Ustada Amina said, my intuition will tell me something completely new, which it wasn't doing before. Or I'll just change completely toward that person, because that's part of the dua, isn't it? To take it away from you and make you content with it, and so on and so forth, if it's not good for you.
Yeah.
So it's not rainbows, fuzzy dreams and swirly patterns.
It's not, but it's not. I think it's also important to add that it's not all negative either.
Yeah.
Well, this comes to our next point. Let's talk about. We've talked about red flags. Let's talk about green flags. How do you know when it's going well? How do you know when you should keep talking to a person? And also, what kinds of questions should we be asking?
I think with the questions we should be asking, you have to know yourself what you want out of a marriage. But, if you start writing, and I know sisters who've got like 2-page long lists of X's and Y's with, what they want and don't want with brothers. And these are sisters who never end up getting married. They just end up as elderly spinsters, because it's a human being marrying another human being. So you might have got your no-go areas. So, for example, sisters, if you're not into polygamy, and the majority of people in the United Kingdom, because of the way we've been brought up, because of the culture, etc., we don't want polygamy. A lot of people don't want it, and it's fine, and it's okay not to want it. Don't allow anybody to turn around and say to you that you're being un-Islamic because you personally don't want to have a polygamous marriage, because you're not being un-Islamic at all. You're not saying you're against polygamy. You're just saying you don't want it for yourself. You don't want that lifestyle. And that is fine. Because blackmail goes on with that.
Exactly. Can I just add to that? That's exactly what's happened to me. So I just wanted to make this point to sisters who are listening, and to brothers who may think that it's okay to say this to sisters. So I was told exactly what you just said, that I'm being un-Islamic and that I'm making something halal haram, and I'm not abiding by the sunnah.
Yeah, absolutely. So be very clear, and don't be afraid of laying things out on the table, because very often, once we get emotionally involved, we kind of become a little bit scared of laying our cards out on the table. So if you want to be able, for example, if you're a working person, sisters, and you work a certain job and you fully expect to continue working that job, make that absolutely crystal clear that that's you. Because some brothers, and that's absolutely not a problem at all, they want a wife who will be a stay-at-home mum. And that's fine to want that. It doesn't make them misogynist just because they don't want a sister who's going to work. But sisters, if you don't communicate that, and you just go along with it anyway because he's cute and you like him and you got on with him and everything else is absolutely fine, then don't cry afterwards when it comes up and bites you. And actually, he's kind of said to you all along that he doesn't want a wife who works, but you thought you could persuade him after marriage. It doesn't work like that. So lay your cards out on the table. And then if that brother or that sister walks away because of the cards you've laid out on the table, then that's a good thing, because it would have created problems later in the marriage. So, for example, if you've got a very strong family network in the area that you live in, and you don't want to move areas at that current time, lay that out on the table. If you're a sister who is divorced and you've already got children and you don't want to have any more kids, and it's fine not to want to have any more children, sisters or brothers, it's fine. But you have to say that. Because if you don't say that, then it'll lead to misunderstandings later on down the line, and then it will all come out. So, like I said, make sure that that happens. Now, when it comes to positive signs, look for somebody who is, so for example, you might be talking and it comes to Maghrib time. Does that person say, look, I'm going to have to get off now. I've got to go and do my salat. I'll talk to you a little bit later. Or do they talk to you all the way through Salat al-Maghrib, missing it? These are signs, because this is real life. What's more important to that person? Their attraction to you or their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yeah. If you're wanting somebody practicing, I mean, some people aren't bothered about having somebody practicing, and that's fine too. It's entirely up to you what you want. But look in that person for the character that they are now, not what you think you can make them into. You are not there to tutor your future spouse. What you marry, sisters and brothers, is what you marry. And it's unfair if you marry somebody who is in a certain place Islamically, maybe they don't pray, or maybe they just go to Jummah for brothers, or maybe they are a sister who doesn't wear the hijab. Brothers, don't go into a marriage with a sister who doesn't wear the hijab and think that you're going to force it onto her later, because your marriage will fall apart. Go in with the attitude that this is the person I've married. If she changes and gets better, or if he changes and gets better, alhamdulillah, that's fantastic. And you encourage them and you help them and they help you, because it's a partnership. However, when you look at the Quran and actually these areas of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts between the couple, and so you've got وَجَعَلْ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. You've got he put between you love and affection, mawaddatan, affection, and rahmata, rahmah. I've known of sisters and brothers who have developed very quickly as new Muslims, mashallah, and they've become really, really super practicing in a very short amount of time, but they've married before they've become that practicing. And then they start really hating on their spouse because their spouse has stayed in the same place as they were when they got married. And maybe they're not praying, but then the brother or sister is praying, and then they're wanting divorce because that person hasn't developed. But actually, brothers and sisters, you can't get married with the intention of changing somebody. Marry the person you want to marry. And if they change, alhamdulillah. If they don't change, then that's fine, because that's your spouse and you have to accept them for what they are. So having this rahmata, this mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, and having this wad, this muwaddatan, this affection for that person, is also accepting the person that they are. Because sisters especially have come to me and say, oh, my husband doesn't pray. So does that mean he's a kafir and that I have to divorce him? I resent him. We argue because I'm telling him to pray and he's not praying. I'm like, sister, first of all, don't take a hadith out of context. It doesn't mean that somebody is, just because the Prophet, peace be upon him, said somebody is not one of us, doesn't mean that they're a kafir. It means that they're a sinful Muslim for not praying. And number two, your spirituality is between yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't get involved with somebody else's spirituality. As long as that spouse, whether brother or sister, is good to you and is kind to you and respectful to you and is, doing their best. You're doing your best to have that word, that affection between one another and having mercy on one another. If you start judging and criticizing, then your marriage will finish very, very quickly. And what you go on to next may not be what you want. Just because somebody appears to be pious it doesn't mean that they actually are, subhanAllah. So we have to be really careful when we get married that we're going to accept what that person is, because they might not become better. I know so many people will want a revert and they'll say, oh, you're going to make me a better Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, I'm not going to make you a better Muslim. You make yourself a better Muslim.
SubhanAllah.
No, I can't make you into something. That's up to you. If you haven't got that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now, then why should your spouse suddenly make you into a pious person? You have to have that yourself. That's your relationship with Allah. So Allah's rahmah and Allah's love is something that is a personal relationship. And if the two spouses are on a similar level, which obviously is the ideal situation, then they can develop that together if they want to. But if one spouse doesn't want to, then that's fine too. But you have to accept that you have married what you've married, and that is what it is.
I think this is especially important. You mentioned earlier about how there are quite a few new converts who have come to the religion through, I don't want to say because of, but through a partner, through a love interest, whether it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And as you rightly said, if that person has taken Shahada, now they have to make a choice, because it's not advisable to continue the relationship in its current state. But we also have to advise these people that, if you choose to make this relationship halal and to marry this person, be aware that this is a Muslim person who chose to be in an illicit relationship with you. So, if you're marrying a person to whom zina, adultery, wasn't an issue, what else is not an issue to them? And how much of an issue will you have with it later? These are things that we need to take care of. And I know lots of people who have married their partners, and their heritage Muslim partners were actually inspired to see the person and the convert changing themselves. And it was a trigger for them to change themselves too, alhamdulillah. But that's not guaranteed, and that's something that, yes, our journey in Islam is ours alone. It's not our husbands, it's not our wives. And their journey is theirs, it's not ours.
Mm-hmm.
When we say it's completing half of our iman, it doesn't mean we take somebody else's struggle on our shoulders. It's,
I think, I've known of spouses who have, so for example, maybe the brother has started following the Salafi school of thought, absolutely fine. But then suddenly he's expected his wife to start putting the niqab and doing this, that, and the other, and, dressing in a certain way. And she's like, well, hang on a minute. You've made this choice for yourself, and that's fine. But, you can't force me to do it. And then he'll divorce her.
Mm-hmm. And we see this also when you could have two people from the same background, from Muslim families, born into Muslim families, who go off on different tangents on their journeys. And it can impact their marriage, or I think they can choose to just respect the fact that, okay, my husband is spiritually on a different path from me, my wife is on a different path from me, but you have that love and that mercy between you anyway, to accept to accept the differences and to accept our faults, because we all have faults. SubhanAllah.
Absolutely.
I think it's really wise advice, mashallah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth is about spirituality, no matter how practicing somebody is or a couple are, they are still on different spiritual levels. Spirituality, it fluxes up and down constantly. So, on one day your spouse's iman might be very high and yours might be quite low, and then on another day the other way around. And if we're constantly trying to monitor one another's iman, then again, when you've got fingers pointed at other people, the thing that's not happening is you're not pointing the finger at yourself, so you're not actually monitoring yourself very well either.
Absolutely.
Moving forward now, I want to talk about the nikah contract. So it's often recommended and spoken about that a couple can actually put conditions or stipulate conditions in their contract. However, it's not usually emphasized. So what actually can go into a contract? And do you think that stipulating conditions in a contract pre-nikah is really important and crucial for converts, or for everyone in general?
I would say for everyone in general, to be honest, because what happens before you get married, obviously you have these conversations with your future spouse and you have your agreements and everybody's all fluffy and happy and There's little birds singing and little stars floating about, little hearts and everything, but nobody writes it down. And then, of course, people have either selective memories or they just literally forget. So when that issue comes up later on, and the one spouse turns around and says, well, actually, we agreed on this before marriage, and the other one says, I don't remember that conversation, then suddenly you've got an unnecessary problem, because actually that problem could be completely erased if you had written it down in a contract in the first place. However, on the other side of things, don't make contracts too extensive, too busy, because otherwise maybe your spouse will struggle to fulfill the clauses in the contract, and then again that will lead to problems. So I think there are several important things that you should have in your contract. You should definitely talk about what your relationship is going to be like with where you're going to live. There might be an expectation that the wife, for example, will go and live with in-laws. And I've seen countless marriages, and this is not aimed just at reverts, this is aimed at all Muslims. I've seen countless marriages face massive issues because the brother has taken the wife to live with his family, which is absolutely fine. And they've had a chat about it beforehand. And, it's okay, it'll just be 6 months or a year, and then we'll get our own place. And then a year turns into 2 years and 5 years, and they've got 2 or 3 children. And mother-in-law is putting pressure on husband to, for family to stay there because of the cultural expectations. And wife turns around and says, well, actually, we kind of had an agreement that we're going to leave at, and it's now been 5 years. Like, what's happening? Oh, well, I can't leave my mum and this, that, and the other. And actually, if it's in writing and you get your welly involved and hang on a minute, this was a promise that we solemnly made to each other. These types of things need to be spoken about. So where you're going to live. So, for example, if you don't want to go and live abroad, so maybe you have made the decision to marry somebody who is not from the United Kingdom. Where are you going to live? Yeah, all that type of stuff. The fact that we can see sisters, and this is basically aimed at sisters, but actually we can talk to brothers about this as well. But really, sisters should not be going into a marriage contract without the choice of tafwid. Okay, so tafwid in the contract is really, really important, because if the marriage, God forbid, goes wrong, then you can be trapped in that marriage if your husband refuses to give you a divorce, refuses to give you talaq. Tafwid essentially is where, and it has to be used with wisdom, and it doesn't mean that sisters can start divorcing their husbands left, right and centre. But what it is, it's when the husband gives permission for his wife or for somebody else to divorce herself, or somebody else to divorce her from him on his behalf. Yeah. So that's a very important thing to have, because when things go sour in a marriage, and maybe one of the spouses wants something, or that this can be used as a power tool. And then what has to happen is the sister will have to go through the Sharia councils, which we all know how appalling a majority of those are, spend a lot of money, a lot of time. She might have to give her meher back and all the rest of this. And tafwid just erases all of those problems.
So this is delegating the power of divorce to a third person, to the woman or to
the wife or to somebody else. Yeah. And that can be done whichever way the couple agree. It can be done on an unlimited, or it can be under certain circumstances. So it could be, for example, if the wife doesn't want polygamy, for example, you cannot put in a nikah that the brother is not allowed to marry a second wife, because this is a right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives men. We cannot take, and it's like you were talking about before, some of the brothers might use this as a point of contention when you can't make something halal haram. Absolutely true. That's right. Yeah. However, at least then, if this does happen, then you have got the get out clause and you're not forced to stay in that marriage. You could say, right, okay, well, you've chosen to do this. This is your right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you that right. That's absolutely fine. However, I actually don't want that life. So I am now choosing to walk away from this relationship. You know, so it empowers the sister. Tafwidh is something that's not spoken about very much by scholars, and it's not spoken about very much by the communities. And for me, it's the responsibility of the wali, it's the responsibility of the imams who are doing these or performing these nikahs to ask the sister if she wants that as a clause in that contract. Because so much abuse goes on. I know numerous sisters who've been trapped in nikah for years because brother, they've had a fallout. The brother has left. Oh, he's got married and carried on his life. He's not providing for her. He's not seeing his kids. He's not doing anything, but she's still trapped in that marriage. And it's used as a power tool, especially in abusive relationships. So I would say definitely that needs to be in the contract. And then, of course, we have the normal stuff in the contract, which is the meher, how much the dowry is going to be. And I really want to talk about dowry at this point because it's very, very important.
It is, yeah.
Dowry is a big problem, okay? With cultural marriages, families tend to ask brothers ridiculous amounts of money to the point that they cannot get married. And I do feel sorry for brothers with this thing because it does happen. Revert sisters, well, we just put ourselves on a plate for free, don't we? We're just like, teach me sort of fair to her. Just because they did that at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and there was the odd situation where that happened, it doesn't necessarily make you more pious if you do that, and it might not be the most sensible thing in the world to do. Okay, a dowry is your security. Okay, the dowry is there to support you as a wife, to do what you want with. So if you're saying to a brother, well, actually, no, ridiculous amounts of like £20 or £30 or £5 or a couple of £100. Well, it's not about getting money off the brother, but it's about seeing commitment from that brother that he is really, really committed to not just marrying you, but to making that marriage last. And he's prepared to stick his neck out to make that happen. That's what the dowry is all about. It's about seeing that commitment. It's the same with getting families involved and things like that. If you've got a brother and he's not, or a sister especially, they haven't approached your family or they haven't introduced you to their family, then there's a problem there somewhere. Why? Why are you so ashamed of marrying a revert and you're so not serious that you won't even get your family involved? So again, revert brothers and sisters, do not sell yourselves short with any of this stuff. If you are not getting the same deal as a person from his own culture or her own culture will get, then you're selling yourself short, and that's not right. Because if he was marrying or she was marrying someone from their own cultural background, it would be a very different picture. So why is it that reverts are seen as somehow like cheap fodder almost, that, marry a revert, it'll be all right. And then if you become easily marryable, then I'm afraid, my brothers and sisters, you also become easily divorceable as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Jazakallah khair, Sister Mina. Your advice has been invaluable and much food for thought for us and our listeners tonight. But before we wrap up, it would be lovely to have your final thoughts and gems just before we leave.
Okay. All right. So I suppose really the final things that I want you to everyone to think about, if you're going to take any gems from this particular conversation, it would be, don't rush headfirst into marriage. Think about it first and think about, is it right for you? Number 2, be really, really careful about who you marry and how you do that. And if there are red flags from the beginning, then walk away, and don't be frightened to walk away, because believe me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you something better. Number 4, don't have unrealistic expectations about what you want or don't want from a spouse and a marriage. Be real and be fair with your potential spouse. So don't give them a great big list of criteria that they're never going to be able to fulfill. And number 5, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is really something important, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, when Allah says he puts between you love and affection and mercy, actually, my brothers and sisters, this is the ingredients that we put into the bowl, but it's up to you to make the cake and to make it work.
MashaAllah. Aisha, how about you? What are your final thoughts on this discussion?
I think the biggest one is what's already been said. I think just don't rush into it. Take your time, get to know who you are, get comfortable in your skin as a new Muslim or Muslimah, especially if you're very young, because I find that, you know, those who take Shahada when they're young, regardless of having a new religion to kind of get used to, they don't really know they didn't really know who they were anyway. They're very young, you know, if they've come out of college or university, they're still trying to find themselves. Add to that in the mix, you know, a new religion, i.e. Islam in this case, there's so much to contend with and get used to. So I think, yeah, take your time, get to know yourself, be comfortable with your identity, as we've touched upon. Very, very important. You know, you do not have to conform to another culture, because another culture does not mean it's Islamic. And yes, please, please, please look out for those red flags. And if you see them, walk away.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd add to all of this just the reminder that marriage is something in Allah's hands. He has written it for us, or he hasn't written it for us. We do all the steps, we do all the due diligence, we ask all the questions. If we've got red flags, we walk away. If we've got green flags, we hope that it works out well. But what we have to remember is, as Ustada Amina said, praying istikhara at every stage, consulting with people to get their advice and listen to their advice, and that we should enter into this not just with our hearts, but also with our brains fully switched on. But at the same time, after all of that tying of camels is relying on Allah. And also, I think understanding that, yes, marriage is something beautiful, and it can be something that is, you know, that can bring you close to Allah. It can also be a test. And if you end up in a marriage that's a test, it doesn't mean that Allah doesn't love you or that your istikhara was wrong or anything like that. It means that that's what is written for you as well. Learn the lessons from it. If it needs to be ended, end it. If it needs to be going through counseling, go through counseling, whatever you need to do, and then move on and learn the lessons. I think that that's an important thing as well. And alhamdulillah, it sounds a little bit strange in a marriage talking about divorce, but at the end of the day, Allah permits divorce. And the companions, the best people, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were people who they did marry and they did divorce when it was necessary, subhanAllah. And we shouldn't feel, ashamed if it doesn't work out. We've learned a lesson, we move on, inshallah. So for all of our brothers and sisters who are looking, we are sincerely making dua that Allah brings you the best spouse for your dunya and your akhirah. And guides us all to the best, inshallah. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of today's episode. And once again, I would like to thank all of our listeners. Our podcast is yours, and we hope that you are benefiting from it. And Jazakillah khair to Ustada Amina for joining us today. I think you have made some really important and thought-provoking points, and given our listeners a lot to take home, inshallah. Barakallahu fiki.
Absolutely. I mean, today's episode is going to be one I think everybody should listen to, whether you're a convert or not. So thank you again, Ustada, for your wise words of advice. And also, just as Amanda said, may Allah grant us the best of spouses, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us the best of spouses and not be a means of oppression or fitna to anyone else. Ameen. And may He grow the love and mercy between our hearts. Ameen. Thumma ameen.
Ameen, Ya Rab. So that's it for another episode of Converts Unplugged. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do share on social media and with all of your family and friends.
Yes, please do share on your social media, like and subscribe to our podcast, available on all podcast platforms, inshallah. So for now, this is Aisha.
And this is Amanda.
And this has been Converts Unplugged.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback. So if you have any comments, questions, or requests for topics of discussion, please feel free to drop us an email on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk and be sure to hit the subscribe button.